And that means Greeks came here 3,000 years ago, 11th century BC. That was right after the famous war dedicated to the city of Troy. You know the Trojan War, right? Helen of Troy, Achilles, Hector. In the end of that war, Greeks were back in homeland Greece, and they noticed that homeland was already invaded by the Dorians. So the legendary leader of the Greeks, Androclos, decided to settle somewhere else, build a new city for his people. So he consulted with the oracle in Delphi. You know, that was customary to consult with the oracles before making important decisions. And she advised him he was going to build that new city where he was going to see fish, fire, and a wild boar at the same time at the same place. That was a prophecy. So he got his men, sailed to this region, but after a long time of search, they failed. So he gave up, desperately decided to go back to Greece. On the last day, he gave a feast for his men. Fish was their meal. And that was so fresh, so it jumped out of the pan and scattered the flames. And there was a wild boar sleeping, of course, behind the bushes, started running away. Use your imagination for that very moment. Probably Androclos and all his men, they were like frozen, kept staring at the running boar. So they chased the boar, killed it, and settled there. This is the legendary foundation of Ephesus by Greek ancestors. Then time passed. 6th century BC, Lydians ruled this area. Lydians, a local civilization of Asia Minor, known for two famous kings, Midas and Croesus. You know the lines we have? Midas touch, rich as Croesus. Lydians were the ones who minted the very first coins in history. Then Persians got here and ruled this area until a young and famous man came from the west. He was the famous Alexander the Great. As he defeated the Persians, Alexander noticed that the port of Ephesus was already silted up by the rivers. So the port became useless. However, Ephesians needed a port. Imagine, Ephesians, they had the biggest commercial port located in the western end of the famous Silk Road. So all the goods brought here with those caravans were distributed to the western world through the Ephesian port. Alexander, with his generous personality, he promised he was going to build a new city with a new port to the Ephesians. On his way back, and he couldn't do that. You know, he died in Babylon. But one of his generals, Lysimachus, kept his word and built the location we're about to visit. Somehow, Ephesians, they refused to move to that new city. They did not want to abandon their homes, which made Lysimachus very upset. On a heavy rainy day, he ordered his civil engineers to go and block the drainage of the former city. So simply they let that city flooded, and the people had to move here. And as we're talking about 4th century BC, overall 1100 years Ephesians inhabited this particular location. Then they had to abandon this location because of the mosquitoes. If you remember, just 5 minutes ago I was telling about the silt, 7th century, the port of Ephesus. So the port became a swamp. Mosquitoes appeared and they caused malaria. So Ephesians had to abandon this location. So we can consider those mosquitoes, in fact, they turn out to be the last invaders in Ephesus. Or the very first ones defeated Ephesians in history. Later on, no other civilizations came and re-inhabited the same location. In time, with major earthquakes, structures collapsed. With erosion, the site was all covered up with dirt. Excavations started 140 years ago. And so far, only 13% of the excavations have been completed. So what you are going to see today is 13% of Ephesus, but that's going to fulfill your expectations. Okay, it's going to be a good site. Now, another important point about the tour. There are two highlights in Ephesus. The fascinating facade of the library of Celsus, and the Grand Theater of Ephesus. the only exceptional theater mentioned in the New Testament. That's where St. Paul attempted to preach the Ephesians, which turned out to be a failure, since there was a riot against St. Paul in the city, in Ephesus. And these two major highlights, once again, the facade of the library and the theater, they are both located pretty close to the lower gate. You know what I try to mean? So very close to the exits, not in the beginning. Starting a month ago, and for the coming 5 years, the theater is closed. The theater is closed because they are reconstructing the stage building. So, but there will be some good spots from a distance. You can take some nice pictures, okay? And still you will be spending sufficient time at the library area.